to the New Yorker cover.
Yeah, hello everyone. Welcome, or welcome back. It's an honor and a pleasure to introduce one of the outstanding artists and authors of contemporary comic storytelling. Please welcome Luke Pearson.
Thank you.
My name is Lars von Törne. I'm a journalist with the Tagesspiegel, and we will be talking about his work and several aspects of it, and we will be doing it in English because Luke is from England. If there are any questions regarding anything that we talk about here, that you would like some bits and pieces translated into German, please feel free to say so, or you can also later, when we have questions from the audience, you can also ask your question in German and then I'll translate. Also wir machen das Gespräch in Englisch, aber wenn Sie zwischendurch Verständnisfragen haben bei einzelnen Wörtern, fragen Sie ruhig nach, dann übersetzen wir, und die Fragen nachher kann man auch auf Deutsch stellen, dann übersetze ich. Aber ansonsten machen wir das in Englisch, weil das die Sprache von Luke Pearson is. So we stick to English because that's the language of our guest. And Luke, your work stands out for many reasons, and your work, I'm mostly, first of all, talking about Hilda and the Midnight Giant, Hilda und der Mitternachtsriese, which is one of several beautiful pieces you've done, but it's basically the only work that's been published in German so far. And your work stands out for beautiful art, fantastic stories. But one thing that is mentioned in almost every single review is the fact that especially your Hilda stories appeal to an unusually broad range of readers, female and male, adults and kids alike. I mean, that might be said about other graphic stories as well, but in your case it seems to be mentioned even more often that it appeals to readers in all ages. So who do you have in mind as a reader when getting to write and draw a story such as Hilda and the Midnight Giant?
I sometimes think I tell myself that I'm writing the kind of comic that I'd want to read when I was a kid, but that's not entirely true, because when I was younger I was reading, I'd always want to read like adult comics, like I was reading 2000 AD, and like the grosser the stuff the better, really. So I would not have liked this as a kid at all. So I'm kind of writing it for this fictional, ideal childhood me, maybe. But I just wanted it to be accessible to everyone, really. I definitely wanted it to have the same kind of appeal, same like broad appeal that something like a Studio Ghibli movie, or like when you think of like Disney movies, the way that really can strike a chord with anyone in any age on some level. Like that's the kind of appeal I wanted to go for. Like it's not for boys or for girls, and I feel like in comics a lot of stuff is kind of segregated like that, even if it's not explicitly said so.
Yeah, and your work really breaks through these barriers of that segregation, which is amazing how much the enthusiastic responses you get from readers of all ages. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention that after this talk, which will be maybe 3/4 of an hour, Luke will also sign his book, and in that little room on the side there will be a book signing there, so you're all invited to have your books signed if you brought them, or I think there will also be some books available for purchase there. There's the pile of books. So that'll happen after our talk here, just as an aside. Your story, especially those 3 stories that revolve around Hilda, that little blue-haired girl that we see here, they are full of fantastic visions and ideas. You were referring also to the Studio Ghibli movies, like the Miyazaki movie, those fantastic anime movies. But the key character is very grounded in your case, and it's a beautiful key character. And when I read these stories, I was wondering, how do you develop a key character like that? The looks, the personality. How do you put these ingredients together?
Well, with Hilda, her look actually came first. She was just someone, like I keep sketchbooks like any artist keeps sketchbooks, but I'd never really have a recurring character that I draw. It's always just like fresh nonsense. But I drew her a few times, or someone who looked like her a bit. She's changed a lot, but she was this person I drew a few times, and I kept coming back to her for some reason, and I did a few pictures just of this kind of blue-haired girl, and she was older to start with. She changed lots, like drastically. And one time I drew a picture of her kind of in front of this big, like Scandinavian-looking town with loads of like creatures and stuff in the background, but it wasn't for anything. I was just doing it to. I can't even remember why I did it, but I liked it, and I liked the way that character seemed to sit in that world. And I still didn't do anything with it for a while. Like, she didn't have a name. I didn't know what it was. I just I let that sit for a while.
Here we see some of the landscape that probably comes from those first.
Yeah, definitely.
And that evolved. Then
well, when I got the chance, when Nobrow asked me to do a comic, I needed to come up with something fast, and I just sent them that picture that I did, and said I'd like to do a comic kind of based on this, and something with this character, but that's all I had. I didn't know what she was like as a character, or what the story would be, but I just used that as a starting point, and everything kind of grew out of that. And as for her as a character, I don't know how I developed her, but one crucial thing about her is I don't write her as a girl per se. Like, I never think too much about the fact that she is a girl, whereas I feel like in a lot of comics more of a point will be made of that, and the whole comic will be kind of angled towards girls, but she is who she is, and I don't make any reference to it really. There's nothing happens to her that it's because she's a girl, you know.
Yeah, and so that the fact that she was a girl just sort of came out of your notebook, because the character that sort of appeared in your notebook just happened to be a girl.
Yeah. I think it would be. I think if she was a boy, it would be less interesting. Like, you could easily make her a boy, and the story wouldn't really change. Like, not a lot would change. But I think with gender in comics and in a lot of media, male character traits are just kind of like neutral, just like non-specific, whereas if you have a girl character, they will be overtly kind of girly and doing girl stuff. So it was important to me to just write her in a sort of generic way. You shouldn't give away a lot about herself. She's just a very sort of open, honest character who reacts to things in a very sincere way, and that's how I write her, really.
Yeah, and it's a character who offers a lot of space for projection. The reader can find a lot of him or herself in her, I guess.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is that, as I said, in Germany we only had one book out at this point, but in the original, in England, you already published 3 books, and it seems like the character changes from one book to the next quite noticeably, not so much in what she does and what she behaves, but artistically. And when we look at the book here on the left, which is published in German, and then Hilda and the Bird Parade is the one that sort of follows that, which only was published in English so far. You can already see the character, the visuals of the character change quite a bit. The nose is less pointy, there's more round edges, the coloring is different, And it also, when you look at the pages, continues. So is this character development sort of an ongoing process, which then also means that you are okay to part with certain visual elements like the pointy nose and just leave it behind because it's ongoing and not finished yet?
I never feel, it wasn't a particularly conscious thing, like I didn't mean to do it. Every time I've changed it, it's been because I was not satisfied with the previous version. It's been kind of weird, that, like the first Hilda book that I did before The Midnight Giant, she kind of bears more in common with how she looks in the Bird Parade. But like there she has that pointy nose, and that pointy nose came from Tove Jansson in the Moomin comics. Like that's, I basically wanted to have the same nose that Snufkin has. So that's what I was doing there. But then for the next book, like after that for Midnight Giant, I tried to kind of overemphasize all the things that I liked about her to start with. So I kind of made her eyes bigger, made her nose bigger and pointier. I made her boots really massive. And I gave her freckles for some reason, and now I've taken her freckles off. So it doesn't really make sense. Also in The Midnight Giant, she seems to get older, and now she's got kind of smaller again, even though it definitely is chronologically takes place afterwards. But I sort of like to kind of think of them as like I made a point to make all the books kind of standalone, even though Bird Parade does follow on from The Midnight Giant through like one plot point, but it's not really important when you start the next book. I forgot what I was saying.
Yeah, but that, I mean, that's partly the charm of reading these books together, because you can really see that the inspiration changes and the output changes too. And one thing I'm wondering, especially with The Midnight Giant, because that to me appeals particularly through all these side characters. It's full, it doesn't only appeal because of the beautiful main character, but it has all these side characters, like those little sort of gnome-like miniature dwarf creatures. We have the huge giant there. And these, as you said earlier, are partly inspired by the Moomin world, by anime, by all sorts of fantastic stories from around the world. But are they also like characters that you sort of consciously develop, or is it sort of just all finding together in your notebook without you really having a plan? That's how it started in the beginning a bit.
Well, that's not really that was really only the case for Hilda herself. Like choosing the other characters has been more specific. At least with Midnight Giant, I just like a lot of this stuff kind of comes from like Scandinavian folklore. That's where the elves come from. In fact, kind of like the whole Hilda's world pretty much came from this project that I did at university that was about Scandinavian folklore, and I was reading a lot about like the little people, the elves and giants and stuff. So I kind of like was mashing that together with some of my own ideas and characters. But like with Midnight Giant, like I was just kind of looking for like, what creatures do I like the kind of feeling of, and what would be, I guess just thinking what would make a kind of interesting story. But I liked the I don't know, like the balance between the tiny elves and the giant, and her kind of in the middle.
Yeah, that's a fantastic combination, because on the one hand she's a little tiny character, but on the other hand she's a giant too. So she's a bit of these two extremes that she encounters there. That's a beautiful combination. And you were talking about the Scandinavian influence. I have to admit that when I think of British comic artists, a lot of the names that are familiar names to us are very much geared towards the North American market. Alan Moore, Mark Millar. There's a lot of people who came from the UK but then became big in the US. And you mentioned 2000 AD earlier, the British Comics magazine, but there was also a very strong sort of exchange with the North American sort of ideas of comics, art, comic storytelling, whereas you seem to draw your influences from very other parts of the world. Japan was mentioned, Scandinavia. Is that something that has become more common, or is that a very small niche that you only discovered maybe partly because it was in your university courses as a subject, as you mentioned?
I think it's more common just these days for people to pick and choose influences a lot more broadly just because of the internet, I guess. It doesn't feel like, it's never felt to me like there was, like I was a part of kind of like one scene or anything, and there's never been one type of comic that's been forced down my throat enough to overly influence me. I don't know. I think it's got more of a European vibe than some of the stuff that my like contemporaries are doing, maybe.
Yeah,
I think that's, you know, I read Asterix as a kid, but I think a lot of people do, so I don't know how big a deal that is. But that was definitely something I wanted to draw on, rather than just the stuff I'm kind of reading now.
Yeah. And one thing that struck me when I read Hilda and the Midnight Giant a few times, it's the story of, as some of you in the audience might know, of this little girl and her mother. They live in this valley on a piece of land that seems to be a piece of land that actually had been occupied long before they moved there by another people. And there's these conflicts that evolve from that. And it's a story that can be read on many levels. It's a fairy tale, a story of a daughter-mother relationship, of a girl exploring her world. But it could also be read as a political metaphor. At least when I read it, I couldn't help thinking of Israel and the territorial conflicts there. I don't know if that's too far-fetched, but there's a lot of scenes that totally make me think of what's going on there, because they also make political references to political motifs that people are having. Were you consciously thinking of parallels such as that one?
Yeah, at least to some extent, not overtly. I definitely was, though, and that's kind of like, I definitely wanted it to, you know, from the start, like I wanted it to have a broad appeal and not be just for kids, and that I felt like that was a kind of time-honored way of doing that kind of. I wasn't really trying to sneak in like a political message or anything, but I just saw the chance to kind of have a little bit of that in there and have it still just make sense in that world, you know.
And that's the great thing.
And you can boil it down into a very simple way. I think that's a good thing to do if you can, I think.
Yeah, I would agree. And the great thing is that it's a lot of fun reading it, and it's very funny, very entertaining, and on so many levels, very, very lighthearted entertainment, but it always carries also bigger questions and bigger answers. So you have these two layers, and that sounds like that's really what you were consciously aiming for.
Yeah.
That's great, because I mean that really makes this book special. And in addition to that political reference, there's also a bigger message, because your books can also be read as an appeal for peaceful coexistence against prejudice, all wrapped in a big adventure story. So how important is the message when you set out writing your stories?
I don't start with the message.
No.
I think it would just be impossible. You just kind of, you'd start yourself off like a losing streak. I don't know. I think it's more. I don't know. I guess I just tried to tell a good story, and when, like, as I was writing it, when I saw the chance to kind of work in a little more nuance, then you can, you know. Yeah. And
that's great. It works really well for me as a reader. Sometimes I've been wondering, do you know who your readers are with the English original, or maybe even here? What's the ratio, younger readers, older readers? Do you have any idea from the feedback you get on events such as this one, for example?
Not entirely. I would say it's more adults, but I think that has a lot to do with where the books are stocked you know. Like it's not a mainstream book. Like my publisher aren't a big publisher, and they're not in every bookshop. Like it's mainly in comic shops and kind of like most of the stuff they do is kind of like artier, kind of like illustration books, art books, and prints and things. So their stuff's usually found in like gallery shops and things. So it's mainly adults buying it, I think. But now, like, if No Brow published it originally, have started like a kids imprint. That this is kind of moved on to that now.
Yeah.
So when the idea of that is, it will get into more mainstream bookshops and children's book sections. So hopefully kids will actually be able to find it then.
Yeah.
But I do find that people, like quite a lot of the time, adults will like buy it for their kids. Like, I get quite a lot of comics readers who have young kids, and I'll get it for them. I'll do a drawing for both of them and stuff, and it's cool. I get some cool like little drawings from kids sometimes that I like. I've had some like nice letters. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, and you mentioned the first edition here, just to show you the comparison. The first story came out with Lowbrow Press here as a sort of a paperback type softcover, and then that's quite a difference from the hardcover letter size. So was this first one just a sort of a test shot to see how it works, and then sort of it evolved into this more sort of serious looking format, or how can that be explained that it took such a change in format?
That first one was part of, it had a fixed, it was part of No Brow's. They did a little series called the 17 by 23 series, and the whole idea of it was to get people who either hadn't done many comics or hadn't had a published comic or had never done comics before to do a book that's like exactly this size. So I think there was about, I don't know, 5 or 6 of them that they did. They were all this exact same page count and size. So I was given that format to do something with, and I chose to do that. I didn't know if it was going to be. I wasn't planning on it being a series then, so it's just a standalone little story. But then when people liked it, I came up with the idea of doing a series, and I like the idea of doing what's basically just like a traditional European album, which
is it prominent in the UK? Or?
No, it's not at all.
Yeah.
Which is why I kind of felt like I wanted to do it, because like when I see that in like a French bookshop, it just blends right in. It just disappears because they're all the same. They all look exactly like that. But in the UK, you don't see that at all, really.
Yeah, and is that slowly changing? Because I understand that you got a lot of positive feedback, so that might have maybe sort of reminded a few people that there's more to comics and that what they've seen before in British comics.
But I mean, there's lots of books, there's lots of graphic novels in the UK, especially now, but just not this kind of album format, which is kind of like shorter than a graphic novel, but a hardback and quite big. You don't really see that. You see kind of longer graphic novels, or kind of, I don't know, smaller little things that people call novellas or something.
Yeah, so it's a bit like here, it's broadening and there's more and more happening and all these different layers. That sounds really exciting. Before I move on to some of your other work, which I find equally exciting but very different, just to see if there's any questions regarding Hilda, the Hilda books, just raise your hand and give us a sign. Yes, there in the back, please.
Since you mentioned your Scandinavian Japanese influences, would you do kind of English folklore like Hilda and Glastonbury or something?
Let me just repeat that so everyone can hear it. In addition to the Japanese or Scandinavian influences, to what extent are there also maybe British sort of folk sources that might have an influence, such as Hilda and Glastonbury, you said?
Yeah, Glastonbury Festival.
Glastonbury Festival, yeah, so British folk tales.
Not really. Possibly. I'm definitely kind of starting to. I'm open to like tapping into British folklore, but like the idea of these isn't too. It's not actually exploring Scandinavian folklore. Like I'm kind of using it as a starting point. Maybe if I was to do it again, I might be more inclined to do a more sort of accurate telling of those folk tales in a way, but like as it is, I've kind of mixed it up with just stuff I've made up as well. So I'm more interested in this as like this world that I've made grounded in this stuff, rather than kind of jumping around to different folklores. Like I've definitely started to look at some stuff from the UK because it's got a big like connection. Like Scandinavian and like Germanic folklore and British folklore, like a lot of it's kind of the same tales and a lot of the same creatures crop up with slight variations. But I think my publisher did suggest at one point the idea that she would like go to different countries and yeah, like do like Hilda in Kenya and stuff, and I don't. She doesn't actually live in Scandinavia, that's the thing, it's just based on it. Like I don't think she really exists in the real world. Yeah.
Yeah. Any more questions regarding Hilda at this point? Otherwise you're also... Yes, follow up, yes.
The name Hilda, why did you choose Hilda?
Yeah, the name Hilda, why was it chosen?
Well, I called the first book Hilda Folk. Like Hilda Folk comes from the word Huldufolk, which is Icelandic. It means hidden people, which means the elves and related creatures. So I was reading stuff about them, and I liked the word, and I liked the idea of finding something that sounded a bit like that. And I was looking for it, and at the same time as I was looking for a name for her, and Hilda kind of, it has the right kind of, I don't know, like Scandinavian, North European sound to it. I don't know, it all just kind of fitted together like that.
So regarding your other work, I was really stunned, I have to admit, because I started reading your work with Hilda, because that's the first that came out in German, and then I explored what else you did, and it's such a stunning range, and Everything We Miss is a sort of graphic novel or extended short story, whatever you want to call it. It's a dark and beautifully unsettling meditation on missed opportunities and wasted chances, a story of a guy who actually loses everything because he cannot really appreciate what life has to offer to him. It's a breakup story, it has a lot of surrealist and introspective psychodrama elements. It's really, really fantastic read, but it's completely different from Hilda in a lot of ways, at least, and mostly for adult readers, I would say. That's not the kind of book you would bring for your kids. And it seems to me, wow, that's the other Luke Pearson. That's Pearson. That's where you sort of let out some other sides of yours. And I was wondering, to what extent is that a conscious sort of thing that you do in order to balance these two sides, or two of probably several sides that you have as an artist in your...
Well, that's the kind of thing I saw myself doing, or like the direction I saw myself going in before I did Hilda Folk. Like that comic was kind of an anomaly, actually. Like I'd never done anything like that before. I didn't have any intention of doing comics for kids before either. It just happened that when I got the chance to do a comic and I needed to come up with an idea, I liked the idea of, it was just that picture again that I had, and it just seemed to make most sense as this kind of all ages story. But when I was actually thinking of comics prior to that, it would have been more in the direction of Everything We Miss. And in a way that's kind of still where my head is, like that's kind of where I want to go in the future. I just happen to have kind of gone sidetracked, and I'm doing this stuff at the minute, which I'm fine with because I'm enjoying it.
And I could imagine, I mean, Hilda, based on the success it has generated so far, that's probably something where your publisher would be most happy if you just continue that, because it works well, it sells well. Do you have to maybe at some point say, okay, I'm going to take a Hilda break and go to some other projects, even though they might not reach the same large audience?
Sure, maybe. Well, originally I did, like the plan was to do, like I did Hilda Folk, then I did Everything We Miss, specifically because I didn't want to do another Hilda straight away. Like I didn't want to fall into the trap of just doing this and it becoming my life. So I wanted to do a Hilda book, something else, a Hilda book, and then something else. But I totally failed at that, just because comics are really hard to work and take loads of time. I just kind of burned out after Midnight Giant and kind of took a break, did some other stuff, and then it was time to do another one. But I'm quite keen to kind of stick with it and finish the series. Like, I want to do one a year and then wrap it up at some point, and then move on, rather than just let it roll on indefinitely, because I don't want it to roll on through my whole life, basically.
Yeah.
Maybe I could revisit it in the future, but
yeah. Are you working at another Hilda story at the moment, which might be the last for the time being?
No, it won't be the last.
A few more.
There'll be a couple more, I think, at least. But I'm not really sure, because there isn't a narrative arc that really goes through them. And even if there is, it's kind of accidental. Like, I always wanted them to be standalone, because I know the kind of like comics buyer I am, and like I was when I was younger as well. Like, I know these things are like quite expensive, and I hate the feeling that you can't jump in a comic series, and you always have to. I'd hate for people to be forever just buying the first book, basically, which has like the worst artwork in it. So I want them to be their own thing, which kind of means there isn't an obvious end in sight. Like, it could just keep going until I kind of run out of steam.
Yeah, and talking about Everything We Miss once again, it's an amazing book, partly because it combines very extreme contrasts. On the one hand, it's a painful story about suffering, about people making the wrong decisions, but on the other hand, there's a lot of playful, funny stuff in there too, like aliens playing around with our planet. And I was wondering, when I read it, there were some pages like this one where I felt, wow, this must be really hard, and you were briefly referring to it, spending like days and weeks over the drawing table with all these really dark and heavy thoughts, and then there's these playful scenes in there too. So I had a feeling you probably brought some in just to make it also a little lighter for yourself, because it probably was a pretty heavy work experience to bring this story to paper. Or is it over-interpreting as a reader?
The whole thing was kind of, it wasn't a heavy experience drawing it, to be honest, because it's not particularly autobiographical, which a lot of people seem to assume it is. And any sort of like dark feelings I was drawing on weren't necessarily ones I was feeling right then. So it was actually kind of quite a smooth, it's actually probably the easiest drawing experience I've had. Like, I sweated and cried a lot more about drawing the last Hilda book. That was far more distressing.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, basically like colouring that stuff.
Yeah. Talking about the colouring, that's actually a point that I wanted to refer to, because your books stand out for several reasons, but the colouring is one of them. It's really outstanding, and I was meaning to ask you to what extent that's something you do completely on your own, or do you also, like some artists, then sort of outsource parts of that to other artists, or they take help, or is it something that is a one-man operation, including all the final touches on that?
I did have help with the last two. Like, the actual colour scheme, I wouldn't be able to give it over to someone to do from scratch. Like, I feel like it's important to me. Like, I feel like at least half of the work kind of goes in the colouring. Like, when you see the artwork by itself, it's pretty ropey, it's pretty, or at least I feel like I hide a lot of my mistakes with the colour. But I did have help just purely because of like time reasons. Had an artist called Isaac Lenkowicz helped me a bit, but basically just doing flatting, just blocking stuff out. And the last couple, like I had, like my girlfriend helped me colour some bits. I even like outsourced a couple of pages to my sister to flat because it was getting too much.
The deadline.
That's just my own time management follies.
Because it's really beautiful. I mean, those of you who know the book will see there's beautiful also changes in coloring when different characters come into the foreground, and it really changes the mood from one page to the other. And I think that alone is also really stunning. I would like to briefly, before we come to wrap up things, talk about some of your other work, just to see where other inspirations and other outlets of your art are. But if there's any questions regarding the things we talked about so far, or regarding the graphic novel, just raise your hand. And otherwise, I would like to learn a little more about what else you do, because I could imagine an artist already being very busy, like from morning till night, with just doing Hilda and leaving it to that. But you seem to have a very strong drive to produce other things, maybe also to balance it out a bit, and some really beautiful short stories amongst those, which can be found on your website. This one is a particularly touching one. How do these stories come to life? I think this one was handed in as a contribution to a newspaper competition, I understood.
Yeah.
How do these stories come to life, and how does it work, sort of balancing that out with the Hilda work?
I don't know. I just enjoy doing them. I like having a kind of a lower page rate, page count. I just like the idea of being able to just have an idea and execute it in a relatively short amount of time, and then be able to show it to people. You know, because I work on like a Hilda book for months. It'll get quite stressful, and then I can't put the thing online either. So often I don't know what the feedback is until some review comes in or something. But I like being able to put just a comic on the internet. Like that comic is actually, that was from before Hilda. That was kind of my first self-published comic.
Oh yeah, okay.
It's only 4 pages of actual comic.
It's really beautiful. I recommend it to everyone to read on your website. And there's also some other work. I think this is also an older work I've found on your website. Is that correct?
Fairly older. That's for a fantasy comic called Spiro, which was originally like a sort of collaborative web comic, and then the guy who wrote it he redid it and did like a graphic novel version, and I did this as sort of like a little backup story in the back.
Yeah.
I like getting these. I usually do these things because someone's asked me to do it for an anthology, or it'll be in a newspaper or something. And just when someone asks, if you just get asked to do something, you've got an incentive to do it, and I like being able to do it. And I kind of take too much of this stuff on, but I feel like I have to otherwise I just wouldn't. I'd do nothing. I would just do it because it's a lot harder to kind of do stuff on your own steam, you know, when there's no deadline, there's no reason for it to exist, and you don't. And it's always nice as well when it's guaranteed, like someone else is going to print it for you and kind of do something with it for you.
Yeah, and this is a beautiful short story which you can see on the website. A very playful tale that takes in fairy tale elements, but it also plays with gender stereotypes. And it's a story where you on your website say it contains your most favorite panel ever, and you can guess which one of these panels is Luke's most favorite panel ever. And maybe you can explain to us why that one in particular.
I don't know. I'm just pretty pleased with it. It's gross, and
because I mean, just to summarize the story, this is about sort of a guy fighting this sort of monster in the swamps, and then at some point he gets swallowed by the monster, and then his female partner sort of attacks the monster and cuts him out of the monster. And I think it's the top panel that you said is your most favorite panel ever. Just because it's so unusually gross and fantastic.
I just felt like I nailed it. No, usually I hate everything I do. I'm pretty chuffed with that.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story, and a beautiful panel too. It's really nice. And the range of styles is so amazing. Here's another one that, I mean, just when you compare these two, you see there's like, you seem to really also play around with different styles and make an effort to go like beyond what you've done before and go into different directions, right? You apparently like to challenge yourself to also sort of move in different directions sort of simultaneously.
I worry, I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing. I kind of feel like it makes me, I don't know, like flimsy or kind of like a bit of a hack maybe, I don't know. Like I can't seem to find, like the Hilda stuff, like there's no other comics that I would use that style for. It's like I've settled on that for that, but it's definitely not my natural style. Like I usually lean towards these kind of dot-eyed people.
Yeah. And yeah, here's another one in dot-eyed people in black and white, and then there's another one that I don't know takes in some. I think this was done for a Japanese anthology, if I got it right.
No, it's an anthology that Retrofit Comics published in America, but the idea was American and European artists who have been influenced by manga, or like specifically alternative manga. That was the idea. It was supposed to be like a tribute to Garo, which is like like a sort of influential manga, like alternative manga anthology.
Yeah. And then you do a lot of illustrations. Well, at least I found a few, and I assume maybe there's more, and some very outstanding examples and very well-known magazines such as the New Yorker have used your work. Is that something that you actively seek? Sometimes is that maybe a good balance from all the other work, or does it just happen every now and then when someone, I think Francis Mouly is the art director, when someone like that would approach you, then it's their call?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty lucky in that most of it kind of comes to me, but I mean, I thought I was going to be an illustrator, and I am an illustrator, I guess. Like I studied illustration at university, and everything kind of pointed towards doing that. It's kind of just stumbled into doing comics. I kind of need to do it as well because that's where most of the money comes from, you know.
The illustration.
But I've been lucky in that I've got to do lots of kind of cool stuff. I don't do tons of it. I don't go out of my way to seek it, but stuff tends to kind of come in.
This was done for the New York Times, I think.
Yeah.
And there's one, and you did a number of really beautiful book covers, and one stood out to me because I think this is a book that your grandfather wrote.
Yes.
And you illustrated the cover. How did that cooperation come to happen?
Well, he just asked me if I'd do it.
Straightforward.
I said yeah, because it would be a pleasure.
But
he basically designed it.
That's what I was going to say. There must be an artistic streak in the family. He seems to be an artist.
He's like an engineer, but I think he used to do a lot of sort of like technical drawing. And he's got some old cartoons that he did. So yeah, he used to draw. And my other granddad was like a talented artist as well. He practically designed that cover. Like I tried to do like make it cooler or like add my own like edge, but in the end I pretty much just traced his sketch.
And I think the sketch is on your website, which is really nice to see that. And the website is very nice anyway, because you are very open about your sort of how you work, and you give a lot of sort of share a lot of bits and pieces here. Some more book covers you did, but then there's also scribbles such as this one, which I found particularly stunning. And if I got it right, this was something that just appeared on paper while you were watching Robin Hood, right?
That is correct.
That's probably the most creative way I've ever seen someone watch a TV show. How do you do that? Watching on the screen and scribbling at the same time?
I don't know, yeah, I mean, I just had it on a little drawing board while I was watching it. But I mean, it was the Russell Crowe Robin Hood, so it wasn't really, wasn't grabbing my attention.
You're not missing too much.
No.
But I mean, would this be an example? Earlier you said that often characters such as Hilda, for example, they sort of get born in the notebook. Would this be an example where maybe you did some scribbles here that sort of later will then show up again in your stories? That's sort of how characters come to life, right?
It's actually not really. I mean, that did happen with Hilda, but most of the time I tend to just not. Like I think that I'll be drawing stuff and I'll think maybe this could be used for something, and I'm always writing down comic ideas. that I never do. I always think I'll come back to them, but I very rarely do because it's just kind of daunting. And like looking back at this stuff, usually like it looks sort of horrible to me after a couple of months. And just confusing. Like I'll write stuff down that makes total sense, but I'll read it back and it'll be just an incomprehensible sentence and this weird little scribble. But sometimes I do go back and there's like surprising stuff in there that I've totally forgotten about.
I mean, this image alone, like, it's something that I looked on for a long time, and I still know I'm discovering new characters there the longer I look. Once again, that's also on the website, and it's really fantastic to look at it. To make sure that we stay within our timeline, if there are any more questions now, this is the time to raise your hand, because we want to make sure there's enough time for signing and so on. So any questions right now? Okay, then, let me ask one last question. You because you're very active, and more active so than some other artists with new media. You referred to the internet earlier, how that's a source where you get a lot of inspiration from around the world. But you also are very active on Twitter, Tumblr, Flickr, all these things that people 40 years and older often don't even know what they mean. And you're very active there. What are the chances on the one hand and the challenges on the other hand of the internet for comic creators such as yourself?
I think it's just useful. Like I'm not really actually that active anymore. Like I don't really, like I'm on Twitter, but I don't really tweet very much. I just think it's just, like most of it is just being present and just making it easy for people to find your work. Like I have all this stuff, but they're all just kind of copies of each other. Like Flickr and Tumblr, and my actual site are all, they all just have the same stuff on them. It's just different people will kind of be looking at different stuff, and I just want to make it so if anyone, just make it as easy as possible for anyone to kind of stumble upon my work or like follow it in the way they want to, you know.
And I highly recommend going there because there's a lot of beautiful things to discover that we weren't even able to touch upon today. So yeah, to keep the time frame, I'll just say thank you very much at this point for the talk, and thank you for listening. So thanks for coming here. There will be a book signing, and you can buy the book, at least the German version of the Hilda book, just around the corner there. And that'll be it. So thanks a lot. Yeah.